What's up everyone, I'm Gushy and welcome to the channel. In this video we're going to be going over the new hero in Overwatch 2, Ramattra. I've been grinding the heck out of Ramattra these past couple days, and I want to share a couple of tips and tricks that I've learned playing him to help you guys as you pick up the character. So in this video we're going to briefly go over his abilities, but then more importantly go over how you should be using them in different situations and against different heroes. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here are all of his abilities and weapons. You have two forms, Omnic and Nemesis. In Omnic form you have the Void Accelerator, which is mostly used for poke damage. And then in Nemesis form you have Pummel, which is a very short range melee ability. You have Ravenous Vortex, which is a slow. You have a Barrier in Omnic form and a Block in Nemesis form. Finally, your ultimate is Annihilation, which is an AoE just like Zenyatta, but it does damage over time, and as long as the enemies stay in the area of effect, then it will continue. Definitely go into the practice range if you want to try these out, even if you don't have a hero unlocked yet through the battle pass. Moving straight to the playstyle and some tips and tricks. So Ramattra actually plays a lot like Reinhart. He has abilities like Sigma, but the choices that you make in-game are very similar to Reinhart. The main difference is that Ramattra has a lot more utility, but with that utility has the trade-off of not being able to take as much space as Reinhart. You can kind of compare Reinhardt's shield to Ramattra's abilities, which for utility are his barrier, which only lasts 4 seconds, and his vortex, which only lasts 2 seconds. So essentially you only have 6 seconds to really help aid your damage that you put out in taking space. And so with that, my first tip is to always go in with an ability. For both Omnic and Nemesis form, it is so much more beneficial to have an ability active as you're going for damage. First, go over which abilities you should be using in your Nemesis form, because ideally you want to be in Nemesis form as much as possible if you're in range to do damage. It does good burst damage, it pierces through enemies and goes through shields. So it's definitely a better attack option than just kind of poking in Omnic form. So before you switch to Nemesis form, I highly recommend using the Vortex to trap enemies in place, making it a lot easier to land your hits. This is very similar to Sojourn's Disruptor shot, and I use it very similar to how Mei uses her Ice Wall. Your main goal is to catch out enemies that are extending too far. In this example, I throw Vortex behind this Moira here. I don't take her out, but more importantly, I take the space for my team and draw out Moira's Fade ability, giving us more time on the objective. Very similarly in this clip, I see that this Lucio wall rides a little bit too far out. I put a Vortex in the choke where Lucio has to go to get back to his team, and pop Nemesis form and easily get that kill. In that case, Lucio only has the option to go through the Vortex, come closer to me, or take the long way around behind him, which will keep him out of the fight for a good couple of seconds and give the space that I'm trying to take. In this example, in the Ramattra mirror, we're trying to push through the choke over here. I throw a Vortex between the Ramattra and his team. This makes it so the team can't push forward and do damage to us, and Ramattra can't go back to his team to go back behind cover. Unlike that previous example with Lucio, Ramattra stays out and brawls once he does find out there's Vortex there, which leaves him perfectly in the line of sight of my teammates, where I can block to take all the attention while my teammates target him down. This moves on to how you should be retreating. Of course, you have block in your Nemesis form to massively reduce damage, but you move painfully slow in this form. So once you're in a decent space, I recommend going back into Omnic form and putting up your barrier that you should still have since you didn't blow all your abilities to safely get out. Now, like I said before, it's very similar to Reinhart in the case where if you are not getting supports from your teammates, both from DPS and your healers, it's a lot harder to push. However, if you do have a good team and you are pretty coordinated, you're definitely more free to use both your barrier and your Vortex offensively and not saving one just for retreating. The way that we can do this is by using the barrier before we use the Vortex. What you can do is put a barrier behind the person that you're attacking to block healing and then quickly burst them down with Vortex and your Nemesis form. In this example, I see the Reinhart pushing him by himself. All of his teammates are behind the barrier, so I switch to Nemesis form and go for a couple of punches. Reinhart definitely makes a mistake of charging in, but it's an easy pick and we're free to clean up. This is where Vortex comes into play. Again, we want to use Vortex to block off the enemies from their teammates to force out abilities and again take that space. Again, you really want to be playing around your abilities. So here I'm waiting until my barrier is back, very safely poking in my Omnic form. I see that Widow shot, which is very threatening to me and my teammates. So wait till my barrier and then put it in the choke. So I have all this room to push up, and as I get to the choke, I can still cover this other angle. If enemies are too far away, or if your Nemesis form is on cooldown, these concepts of going in with your abilities still apply. Again, Vortex is really good to slow enemies and make it easier to land those headshots. Because like I said before, Omnic Form Primary Fire is kind of a tickle machine, unless you're doing headshots. So definitely go for those headshots. Alright, next let's go over how to use Ramatra's ultimate. I've had my share of bad Ramattra ultimates, so here's a couple of tips to help you survive and get valuable ultimates off. Now the number one biggest mistake is going in by yourself, thinking you could 1v5 even if you have your block up. Block does significantly reduce damage, I think by 75%. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below. But you really don't want to be blocking to your ultimate because you move slower and enemies can easily just walk out of the AoE even if they don't have Lucio. Now this example is a little bit of a better one. Again, same concepts. Always use your abilities beforehand. Here I throw out my barrier and Vortex to slow enemies down, separating them from the team. This makes it so I can keep Annihilation up for longer and enemies don't get away. Second difference is that I'm playing behind cover. Annihilation is more useful when you are punishing enemies that are pushing too far forward. This keeps me in sight of my healers to help keep me up as my health gets low because you will be targeted. Because of these conditions, both enemies being slowed and being in line sight of my healers, I'm free to block and soak up some of the enemy's cooldowns and assess the situation. You first target the Ramattra who's separated from his team, then the next closest, which is Widow, who is attached and hiding behind the cart, and finally this Zenyatta who has no mobility options to escape. On the flip side, this is a bad example here. Here I'm only using one cooldown. I'm using Vortex to keep enemies in. However, the major mistake is that I'm not in line of sight with my healers and I easily get bursted down by the many people in front of me, especially since I didn't use barrier along with Vortex. This is actually a better example. Barrier is definitely more important than Vortex because you can use Vortex while you're in Nemesis form. So in this example it works out a lot better. Of course, this team makes the obvious mistake of trying to brawl Ramattra in Annihilation, especially since they have a Lucio who can easily speed them out. So I do make sure to take out Lucio first. And for some reason this Doomfist thinks he can brawl. And for the most part in a 1v1 he can. Just look at how long he lives. Now while you're in Annihilation, if you can, try to block most notable abilities that do burst damage. Keep in mind it only blocks damage from the front, so you might have to turn around for flanking heroes. And any abilities that stick onto you, you can't negate the damage. Now once Annihilation ends, keep in mind that you most likely will have Nemesis form again. This is usually a perfect time to put up another barrier, go back into Nemesis form, and finish off the enemies that you haven't killed through Annihilation. Now the thing that I say I can improve in this clip is definitely aiming better. Again, comparing to Reinhart, who can easily just swing his hammer and connect to any targets in range. As Ramattra, you have to hit your punches to get value. The hitbox is definitely generous, but just something to keep in mind as I critique myself, that it does take a little bit more aiming than Reinhardt swinging his hammer. Now, moving on and comparing Ramattra against other tanks, I really think that Ramattra is maybe mid-tier, but is definitely situational. He definitely excels at close range and maps with a lot of corners he could play around. He definitely needs external cover to really push long distances. As far as tank matchups, first up is against Winston. Winston is pretty meta right now, and honestly Ramattra holds his own against him. Again, this is very map specific, but specifically in a 1v1, I think they're even. Ramattra can definitely control space better. His punches go through his shields and could easily bully Winston off a certain objective. But where Winston takes over is mobility. If Winston is targeting backliners away from Ramattra, Ramattra really can't help his teammates at all. In this case, you really have to land your Vortex to trap Winston from getting away, and that's your main win condition. Other than that, you have to make sure you pressure him in the poke phase, as you could really rack up some ult charges and take a bunch of space if Winston is out of position and out of abilities. Next up against Doomfist, he does not do well. And this is going to be a common theme with all other tanks. Any other tanks that has a significant CC ability kind of dominates him. I think you could definitely brawl with Doomfist, but in most situations because Doomfist has more mobility, along with the fact that Ramattra has only 6 seconds of defensive cooldowns, with the next best option being block in Nemesis form, which reduces your movement and only blocks from one side, makes it so that Doomfist can easily get around your barrier or Vortex, and then his punch also takes you out of your block. It's only for a couple seconds, but it is enough time if your health is getting low, which is the most likely time you'll be using block. So tips against Doom, you really want to make sure that you use your abilities when his abilities are on cooldown, and definitely make sure you play with your team so you can get healed up and you don't get caught out, again because you don't have any mobility. Okay, next up against Reinhart, I think you actually win this matchup. Kinda similar to Winston, your poke phase is a lot more efficient. It depends on how good the Reinhart is at managing his shield. You definitely want to be poking his shield down as much as possible. And when he does get close, your punches in Nemesis form have a little bit more range than his hammer. So there's a very important sweet spot where you can do damage to him and he can do damage to you. It's really important to not get caught out because this charge is very easy to land, especially when you're in Nemesis form because you're humongous. And most importantly, you have to be aware when he has shatter. Your barrier is your only defense against this, so make sure you try to predict this or correctly use cover so that you avoid it. Next up against Sigma, he definitely loses this matchup. Ramattra has an inferior barrier, it's stationary and has a longer cooldown. Sigma has better poke damage, and if you're trying to brawl in Nemesis form, Sigma can easily contest you because he has rock to stun you and easily get out of range of your punches. So again, horrible matchup. Against Ball, I think Ramattra is a little bit better, mostly because you can shut down Ball with both of your abilities. Vortex can trap Ball in place, and Barrier can be used to protect your teammates at a distance. I haven't had much time directly with other tanks, but I can safely say that against Orisa, again because of the Lance stun, and her Fortify which can easily contest Nemesis form, she wins more times than not. Zarya is an interesting matchup. You really have to make sure you don't charge her up and play around her bubbles. If you can make sure that you catch her while her bubbles aren't up, she has no ability as well, so you can easily catch her out. Hog is top tier right now. He probably has the most deadly CC ability with his hook. Easy loss for Ramattra. And finally, Junker Queen. I think Ramattra actually beats her. Junker Queen doesn't really have good burst damage, and if she does, Ramattra could easily use Vortex to get away or Barrier to block things like the Jagged Knife. With that, that's everything I have for you guys for the new hero Ramattra. I'm having a ton of fun playing Ramattra. He has that melee playstyle that I kind of imagine Doomfist to have, but isn't as short range as Reinhart. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Are you guys having fun with Ramattra? How do you think he is compared to other tanks? And let's talk about it. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope to catch you in the next one, and GG.